Hey everyone, and welcome back to another video where I'm sharing my journey to running my first marathon. Today, I want to walk you through my running history and why I chose the marathon as my next race. If you hear something that reminds you of your own journey, let me know down in the comments. I would love to hear your experiences. I remember that I was active as a child. During recess at school, we were always playing something. Football, basketball, kickball, you name it. I've always enjoyed watching and playing sports, and I still do. However, I never stood out in any of them. I was an average athlete on almost all levels. One area that I always struggled with was the running portion of sports. I wasn't very fast and I couldn't run that far, but I never let that stop me from wanting to play. After looking through some old photos, I found some things from my first running experience. In the spring of 2012, I joined my middle school's track and field team. I initially wanted to play baseball, but I didn't make the cut. So I found myself on the track team, that way I could still play a spring sport. Although I was on the track team, I didn't have any interest in running. The truth is, I really only wanted to throw discus. However, there was a rule that everyone must run at least one event. So I knew I was going to try to pick the shortest event possible, the 100-meter dash. That way I didn't have to worry as much about running during practice. Well, after a few practices and probably a last place finish in the 100-meter dash, the coach decided to move me over to the 400-meter event, which had an unlimited amount of openings for each team. Although the 400 meter is still considered a sprint, I struggled to jog it and still usually ended up towards the back. In 2012, I did the most amount of running events in my life. That year, I did my first obstacle course 5K and my first road 3K, 5K, and 8K. Although I stayed on the track team the following year, I didn't continue running road events outside of school. It wasn't until the end of 2014 until I decided to do another 5K race. Also in that spring, I decided to transition from track and field to soccer my freshman year of high school, which anyone that knows anything about soccer can let you know that there's quite a bit of running in it. And although I didn't enjoy that aspect of it, I enjoyed the game. And I also played center back, which cut down the running a lot. Throughout the rest of high school, I didn't do any more road races. The only thing I did was in 2016 was a 5K obstacle course. But also in 2016, I started to run a little bit more in my free time because I knew in the upcoming future I'd be running a lot. In June of 2017, I left for US Army basic training. Now, my time in the Army probably had me in the best running shape I've ever been in my life. I know I had personal best on the 2 mile of 13 minutes, as well as on a few occasions, I ran a sub 40-minute 5 mile. My running in the Army still wasn't passionate though, but I was in the 82nd Airborne Division of Fort Bragg, so some form of running was almost guaranteed for morning PT. I was more interested in lifting weights, but that didn't matter because there were still PT standards that had to be maintained, which I did. While in the Army, I ran 2 more obstacle course races, a Rugged Maniac 5K with friends and a Spartan Super 10K with family, both in 2019. I then took another big break from running and waited until 2022 before I ran my next event, which was a Spartan Beast 21K. This was actually the first race that I had run without family or friends, as well as it was my longest. I learned a lot during this event because I had not prepared for it properly. I had ran a handful of times in the coming months prior, but nothing more than 5 miles at a time and very few runs throughout the week. I also didn't fuel at all during the run, so I ended up hitting a wall around mile 8, but thankfully there was someone there kind enough to give me some gummies that was running nearby. Once I finished the race, I was hurting pretty badly, and it was hard for me to actually enjoy the moment. Following that race, I stopped running again for quite a while, and I would say things like, "Oh, I'm glad I did that last Spartan, but I don't think I'll ever do anything like it again." In 2023, I only ran 46 total times, covering 100 miles, which is just over 2 miles per run. So, why on earth did I decide to run a marathon as my next race? Well, it's because of the challenge. Throughout my running events as a child, doing 5K fun runs and through school sports, I never really pushed myself to see what I was actually capable of doing. I stayed at comfortable paces during them, and I never put out extreme effort. It wasn't until I was in the military until I seen how much the body could accomplish and how the body can go way further than the mind can. Towards the end of 2023, I could tell that there was something missing from my life. My gym workouts were lazy, and I was struggling to find motivation to even go to the gym. My nutrition wasn't much better as I started to put on unnecessary weight. As I went through the motions of the gym, hoping my motivation would reignite, I started to reflect back on when things were going well for me in my fitness journey. I would ask myself questions like, when was I happiest about being in the gym, or when was my training going really well? I had narrowed it down to the springtime of 2022. Now that I knew when my training was going really well, I had to start asking myself, what was I doing during that time that made that training so good? During that time, the thing that was really different for me was I was doing the 75 hard challenge. Now, if you don't know what the 75 hard challenge is, I recommend you looking it up. There's a lot of people that can benefit from doing it. I enjoyed 75 hard for the most part. Some days were tough, but I didn't want to start over. And I liked the challenge that it presented. Once I finished that challenge, it was a few months later when I ran the Spartan Beast 21K. That race was a test of the mind and the body. It's the same distance as a half marathon, but it also includes 30 obstacles throughout the course. I didn't have too much trouble with the obstacles from my gym workouts. However, like I said before, I didn't run properly prior to the race, so I definitely struggled in that portion. But overall, I loved the race because of the challenge it presented. I realized that I needed to start working towards something again. I love the discipline that it creates and the hard work that it requires. When I started to think about the next thing to work towards, I knew I wanted it to be endurance-based. I also didn't want to do anything I had done before. This meant I wouldn't do another Spartan half marathon or anything of lesser distance. This challenge had to be more difficult. It had to be something that required a lot of work, an event that less than 1% of the US population has ever completed. My next challenge is going to be a marathon. I invite you to follow along in my journey as I work towards completing this challenge. You can show your support by liking and subscribing for content coming out in the future. I look forward to sharing my journey with you.